Welcome to the IWP podcast, coming to you live from the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. I'm Jim Robbins, Dean of Academics at IWP, an accredited graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs, offering a variety of certificates, master's degrees, and doctorates, both in person and online. You can check out our programs and our courses at our website, iwp.edu. It's sad to see the drift in U.S. relations with Israel. We had Senator Chuck Schumer's speech criticizing Israel's government and calling for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to be ousted as an obstacle to peace. Then President Biden's statement backing Schumer's speech, even as the senator was walking it back somewhat. Then Secretary of State Blinken meeting with opposition leader Benny Gantz in Israel. And note that Gantz had met privately with Biden administration officials in the White House a few weeks ago. We have Vice President Kamala Harris saying she looked at the maps, she studied the maps, and concluded that Israel should not conduct operations in Rafah in Gaza. We have the United States abstaining on a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, which incidentally said nothing about Hamas, and came after Russia and China vetoed a U.S. resolution. This move emboldens Hamas in their ongoing ceasefire negotiations with the Israelis because it makes it look like the UN is on their side. This is complete amateur hour by the U.S. delegation and utter diplomatic malpractice. And in response, Netanyahu canceled a planned delegation to D.C. to discuss the Rafah situation. And he and Biden are apparently no longer on speaking terms. It's sad when friends fight, isn't it? There was some good news. The latest spending law cuts funding for UNRWA until next year. But aid to Israel is still hung up in Congress, and progressive senators and representatives are dead set on killing it. We know about the domestic political angle to this issue. Biden's election year squeeze, and the fact that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party would just as soon have a one-state solution, and it wouldn't be Israel. We also know that some of this is personal. They just don't like Netanyahu. Remember what President Obama did, embarrassing Netanyahu during a 2015 visit to the U.S., and sending Democratic operatives to get involved in Israel's elections that same year in something called V15? So it's not the first time that relations are strained. But why do Americans think that expressing their opinions about the internal politics of another democratic country will change anything? Why is election interference okay when it's Israel? It's true that sometimes you do want to promote political change. Saying, for example, that the United States supports the Iranian opposition could actually help. Not the Biden administration is ever likely to do that. It's also significant that the Biden administration is not calling for elections in the Palestinian Authority, where they were due many years ago. But President Abbas has ignored that particular requirement. Granted, it's not in the U.S. interest to have an election in the Palestinian Authority because Hamas would probably win. But making statements against Netanyahu won't harm him politically. It may even strengthen him. Believe it or not, people in other democracies don't like Americans telling them what to do. Biden and Schumer have made any Israeli opposition leaders look like American puppets. And no opposition party in a democracy wants that reputation. And the American posture towards the war is a terrible misreading of what the Israeli people want. They want victory over Hamas, which is what Netanyahu is promising. And by taking a position against him, it looks like the Biden team is against victory. This is not a bad assumption. The Biden administration is pushing for ceasefires without regard to facts on the ground, opposing the move into Rafah, imposing a two-state solution in a way and on a timeline that is implausible, as well as freeing up $10 billion to Iran, the country that is the real obstacle to peace. $10 billion. Why? And why now? Do the Houthis need to reload? Why is the U.S. underwriting both sides of this conflict? So many things the Biden administration and the Democrats are doing in their rhetoric and in their policies do not help Israel. The Israeli people understand that. Biden is not popular there. A recent poll showed Gantz and his coalition trouncing Netanyahu if a snap election was held, like the Democrats want, but also shows Israelis favoring Donald Trump as the next US president over Biden by 14 points. So, interesting. I mentioned that pressuring Israel was nothing new. So let's revisit another unfinished war. Let's go back to 1982. If only, right? What I wouldn't give. Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 after a series of incidents with the PLO. Operation Peace for Galilee was launched June 6th, and by June 14th, the IDF had surrounded Beirut and put it under siege. 8 days. Try that again. Not so easy now. And incidentally, if you want to get ahead of events, look at that operation and the more limited 2006 war in Lebanon, because Israel will have to address the Northern Front eventually, and that may come sooner rather than later. And it will be a much bigger and more complex operation, with the potential for escalation, just like 1982. That escalated a number of ways, bringing in foreign forces, including the US, becoming a proxy war with Iran, and leading to a number of events such as the Marine Barracks bombing, the Beirut embassy bombing, the torture and murder of Station Chief William Buckley, the hostage crisis, all the way to the Iran-Contra affair. It's an interesting story. Maybe another time. But during the Beirut siege, there were the same human rights-based criticisms of Israel as now, in part because of similar warfighting conditions, complex urban terrain, many non-combatants, and terrorists employing human shields. Israel was using, or accused of using, indiscriminate cluster munitions. These were supplied by the United States, by the way, and the Reagan administration was upset with the optics. So in August, President Reagan got on the phone with Menachem Begin and laid down the law. He did not want Israel using U.S. aid, as he reportedly said, to blow the arms off kids. More to the point, Israel's attacks were interrupting peace talks headed by U.S. Special Envoy Philip Habib. Reagan even described the bombing of West Beirut as a Holocaust. Begin said this hurt him deeply. I know what is a Holocaust, he said. So it was a very serious conversation. Begin thought about it, called the Gipper back, and then agreed to do what Reagan wanted. In fact, Israel had anticipated Reagan's demands and already declared a ceasefire even before the first phone call arrived. Here's a key point. The Reagan White House did not broadcast details about the call afterwards, just saying it was frank and straightforward, and didn't discuss Begin's response. Reagan's demand was made in private, man to man, not a posturing speech on the Senate floor, not a presidential press availability, not threatening Begin's premiership, not embarrassing Israel in the middle of a war. It was diplomacy done the right way. Now for some contrast. A few months earlier, on June 22nd, 1982, Begin was in the U.S. before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. A Democratic senator took Begin to task, pounding the table and threatening that Israel must comply with U.S. demands or aid will be cut. It was an unprecedented dressing down of a foreign leader on an official diplomatic mission. So here is one account of Begin's response. Don't threaten us with cutting off your aid, he said. It will not work. I am not a Jew with trembling knees. I am a proud Jew with 3,700 years of civilized history. Nobody came to our aid when we were dying in the gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it. We fought for it. We died for it. We will stand by our principles. We will defend them. And when necessary, we will die for them again, with or without your aid. And as you probably already know, the senator that Begin was responding to was Joe Biden. What a mismatch. If you know about Begin's life story, you know he's not going to put up with some whippersnapper from Delaware carping at him. Begin, an ardent Zionist from his youth in Poland, who as a Polish officer was arrested by Stalin's NKVD and narrowly escaped being killed at Katyn, whose family was wiped out by the Nazis, who in British Palestine became head of the radical Irgun underground faction, who fought the British for Israel's independence, who fought the Arabs for Israel's survival, and who was a member of the first and every subsequent Knesset, who founded the Likud party, who was the first ever conservative prime minister, who forged peace with Egypt and Anwar Sadat. And Joe Biden's going to tell him what to do? No way. It was quite a meeting. Senator Paul Tsongas said he had never seen such an angry session with a foreign head of state. But when Begin came out of the conference room, he was actually amused by it all. I enjoyed the session very much, he told the New York Times. It was a lively discussion. If you want to use other adjectives, lively is enough, he said. Incidentally, Biden was mainly upset over Israel's settlement policy, not so much Lebanon. According to Begin, Biden said about the invasion, it was great. It had to be done. If attacks were launched from Canada into the United States, everyone would have said, attack all the cities of Canada, and we don't care if all the civilians get killed. Come on, man. That was old Biden. And it's worth noting that President Biden has been throughout his career an outspoken supporter and defender of Israel, despite his antipathy for Netanyahu. Biden understands, or should understand, the stuff of Israeli leaders. They are tough because they have to be. Golda Meir told Biden personally that the Israelis have a secret weapon in defense of their country, in that they have nowhere else to go. Then there's someone like Netanyahu, a political survivor for decades, who has dealt with many U.S. administrations. Netanyahu surely remembers what Begin said to Biden in 1982. He was deputy chief of mission at the Israeli embassy at the time, so he may even have been in the hearing room. But the strife between the U.S. and Israel shows the utter confusion and lack of strategy in American policy, which is ad hoc and reactive, has no clear vision or a strategic endpoint. What Washington should be focused on is Israel winning the war. Instead, the Democrats are focused on mitigating damage to their party because they need to placate their progressive wing. The progressives would like to see Israel destroyed, let's face it. That's their policy. It's the same as Hamas, from the river to the sea. Biden has to at least appear responsive to progressive concerns, while at the same time not buying into their desire for Israel to lose the war. But everything they're doing now is harming the war effort. Biden deals with symptoms, not with causes. The cause is Hamas. Get rid of Hamas and the war will end. The suffering will end, and security can be restored, at least for a while. That should be the focus of U.S. policy, not arming Iran, undermining Israel, and doing things that will keep Hamas in power in Gaza. Frankly, the authors of the Afghanistan debacle have some nerve telling Israel anything, much less how to win a war. So while we're talking about obstacles to peace, why isn't the White House calling for Hamas to surrender to end the fighting? Peace could break out tomorrow if Hamas would simply lay down their arms and give up. Why doesn't the US government spend more time messaging that idea instead of trying to disrupt and undermine a sovereign state and strategic ally? Even Mohammed Mustafa, the new prime minister of the Palestinian Authority, castigated Hamas and blamed them for the war, denounced their ties to Iran, and criticized their corruption, hypocrisy, and the lavish lifestyles of the leadership in Doha. It's a sad day when the Palestinian Authority has better talking points than the White House. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this podcast, please share and subscribe. For IWP, I'm Jim Robbins. Join us next week for another edition of the IWP Podcast.